Welcome to the Lysandre format. Today we have a completely normal best-of-3 match between myself and Glacial. To learn more about the Eternal format, check the links in the description. A few weeks ago, in order to prepare for April Fool's Day, I challenged Glacial to have a match between decks made exclusively out of Eternal Band cards and Basic Energy. They were brave enough to accept the challenge, so off we went to cook our lists. This is Dusknoir FTK. This deck is able to win on turn 1 going first by knocking out all of your opponent's Pokémon in play by using Dusknoir's ability. As those of you familiar with Standard will know, Dusknoir is able to knock itself out, putting 13 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokémon in the process. We are able to put Dusknoir into play on turn 1 thanks to the Stadium card Broken Time Space, which allows you to evolve any Pokémon right away. So, let's move on to game 1 and see what Glacial has cooked. Unfortunately, I lost the coin flip, so Glacial went first in this game. And I started with Duskull in the active spot and Celebi X on my bench, whereas Glacial started with Uxie in the active spot. So far we do not have really any indication of what they're playing, because I imagine Uxie with its setup Poké Power is going to be a staple in this format. Setup, by the way, in case you're familiar with Shaymin X, which is a card that's banned both in Eternal and in Expanded, you may be familiar with that effect. When you play Uxie to your bench, you can draw until you have 7 cards in your hand, so that's even one more compared to Shaymin. They play Sabrina's Gaze, which is a trainer card without any indication, so it counts as an item card, which makes both players shuffle their hand into their decks and then draw a new hand of the same size. So that's what we do. And then they bench a Duskull, so it appears that they have found the FTK strategy too, in fact the same FTK strategy, and so this one is going to be essentially a mirror match. Then they play Scoop Up Net, which is a card that was in Standard not too long ago, and is also banned in Expanded. It allows you to put one of your Pokemon, except Pokemon V or Pokemon GX, that are in play into your hand. So you recover every stage except for attached cards, which get discarded. And it's particularly busted in this format because it lets you reuse your Uxie. And so they can reuse Uxie's Poké Power to draw a few more cards. Then they find yet another Sabrina's Gaze, another Duskull, and they play Item Finder. Item Finder allows you to discard 2 cards from your hand in order to recover a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand. So it's the same effect as Dowsing Machine, but unlike Dowsing Machine, this one is a regular item. It's not an ace-spec, so you can easily play 4 of them. And in fact, both of us do. They discard Professor Oak, which is Professor's research on an item, basically, and a Poké Drawer Plus, which I will talk about more later, to recover Scoop Up Net, which they use to, again, recycle Uxie's Poké Power. Then they play Professor Oak, getting a new hand of 7 cards right away, and they find the Stadium Broken Time Space, which, like I mentioned in the intro, allows both players to evolve their Pokemon, even during the turn the Pokemon was played, or even during the first turn. So, with Broken Time Space now in play, they evolve their bench Duskull into Dusclops, and they play a Junkarm, which is basically a weaker item finder, because it has essentially the same text, but do keep in mind that trainer card on this card from the Hard Gold Soul Silver series refers actually to just item cards. With this, they discard another Junkarm and the supporter card Lysandre's Trump card, which is a crazy card. Allows each player to shuffle all of their discard pile into their deck except for other copies of Lysandre's Trump card. And with the Junkarm, they get Poké Drawer Plus. And then they play 2 copies of Poké Drawer Plus. Poké Drawer Plus allows you to, if you play 2 copies at once, allows you to search your deck for any 2 cards that you want. So with that, they grab their 2 cards. One of them is another Dusclops, and with the other they grab Professor Oak. They could have grabbed Dusknoir and ended the game on the spot by KOing my active with Dusclops and my Celebi with Dusknoir, but I mean, doesn't really make a difference, they're gonna win anyway. Then they play Puzzle of Time. Again, if you play 2, you can recover 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. with that, they again get a Poké Drawer Plus. And with that, they grab Dusknoir, and at this point, it's GG. So, game 2, as the loser of game 1, I had the right to choose who went first, and obviously I chose to go first. I started with both Duskull and Uxie in play. I will explain why during game 3. So, my top deck is a Broken Time Space, so immediately I have one of the most important pieces in my hand. Then with Scoop Up Net, I recover my Uxie. And then here's a filthy combo. I play Lass. Lass makes both players reveal their hand, and then they shuffle all trainer cards from their hand into their decks. So, my opponent's hand was all trainer cards, as you can see. So all of their hand was shuffled into the deck. Meanwhile, on my side, I only had 2 trainer cards, Trash Exchange and Puzzle of Time. So those go back in the deck. And then, after I played Lass, I can just rebuild my hand using Uxie. Isn't that wonderful? So with that, I find the Duskull. I play another Uxie to draw a few more cards, finding Dusclops, and I immediately pop my Dusclops because it's able to knock out their Duskull. So each of us takes a prize card for this. Then I have a bunch of junk in my hand, so I decide to just play a Professor Oak, which refreshes my hand. Again, I have a bunch of cards that I don't need, but luckily for me, Duskull here has an ability, which allows me to discard 3 cards from my hand in order to search my deck for a Dusclops and put it onto Duskull to evolve it. So that's what I do. I discard 2 Sableye, which I don't need right now, and a Poké Drawer Plus to evolve into Dusclops. And then because of Broken Time Space, I can immediately evolve into Dusknoir and pop it to KO their Uxie. Again, each of us takes a prize card. And then I use Scoop Up Net to recover Uxie and rebuild my hand once more. I do have 2 Puzzle of Time in my hand, and I can use them to recover Duskull and Dusclops, and with those, I can knock out their Duskull, and therefore I win game 2. So, now we move on to game 3. As the loser of game 2, Glacial chose to go first. However, I started with Sableye in the active. And Sableye has a nice little Pokébody, which says if Sableye is your active Pokemon at the beginning of the game, you go first. Which is just lovely, because like with this deck, I really rely on going first. So, despite the fact that Glacial chose to go first, I'm gonna go first instead, no? And actually, this is the reason why I started with Uxie in play instead of keeping it in hand during game 2, because just in case Glacial had a Sableye in their active spot, I could have made life harder for them by having 2 Pokemon for them to knock out instead of just 1. But now I am the one with Sableye in the active spot, so I'm gonna go first and I'm gonna win. I'm gonna win game 3, I'm gonna win the match, right? No, I'm not. Because Glacial has a Sableye of their own in the active spot. And Sableye's Pokébody says if each player's active Pokemon has the overeager Pokébody, this power does nothing. Therefore, both of our Pokébodies do nothing, and Glacial goes first, as they chose. I was actually laughing out loud at this point as soon as they revealed the Sableye. It was so funny to me. Anyway, the game proceeds. They have a Broken Time Space, they play a Uxie to draw a couple of cards. Then they play Secret Mission, which allows them to look at my hand, and then they discard as many cards as they want from their hand and replace them with new cards from the top of their deck. So they discard 3 cards and draw 3. Then with Item Finder, they get Secret Mission back. Then they play Scoop Up Net to recycle their Uxie. Then they consider playing Professor Oak, but instead choose to play Sabrina's Gaze. So both of us get a new hand. And what's even funnier, I get 2 of my other Sableyes just looking at me from my hand. Another Item Finder, they get Puzzle of Time. They refresh the Uxie. They are able to put Dusclops into play, getting rid of my Duskull. Then with Puzzle of Time, they retrieve Duskull and the Dusclops. With Uxie they draw a few more cards, they find another Duskull. Sabrina's Gaze again, gives them a new hand. Item Finder gets them a Scoop Up Net, so they can reuse Uxie yet again. 6 more cards, 2 Poké Drawer Plus, they find the Dusknoir, and game and match go to Glacial. So, Glacial ended up winning this absolutely hilarious match. Both of us had a great time, both playing and building the decks. Here you can see their list. It has the same principles as my list, but there are a few differences. First, they have fewer options to recover Pokémon, foregoing the inclusions of Trash Exchange and Celebi EX, although they do have a higher count of Junk Armor to recover Puzzle of Time. Second, they opted for higher consistency, having higher counts of Secret Mission, and including Sabrina's Gaze and even one Dedenne-GX. Third, they played a different Duskull, and one fewer Dusknoir. And finally, they didn't play the Filthy Lass, and had a lower count of Lysandre's trump card, although these things obviously don't matter if you win on turn 1 going first. Note that some counters to this FTK strategy exist. First, and most obviously, you can start with Spiritomb in the active spot, locking your opponent out of playing item cards, therefore greatly reducing their consistency. Second, there are 2 tag team Pokémon in this format that can survive 2 hits from Dusknoir. So if you manage to start with 2 of those in play, plus a 3rd basic Pokémon, you can force the game to go to a tiebreaker, which you'll then win easily. Finally, I wanted to share what was actually my first attempt at a list in this format. It was a Lost Link box deck which revolved around the Mew Prime. Despite the enormous consistency that this format allows, this deck was still kinda slow, mainly because of the lack of energy acceleration. This list could definitely see some improvement, but I stopped working on it as soon as I found the FTK. So, with that being said, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions about the game or the lists, or about the format, feel free to comment below. Thanks again to Glacial for accepting this ridiculous challenge, and happy April Fool's Day.